Sometimes people will come to a mindfulness practice with the understanding that it's going to immediately quiet their mind and lead to these wonderful states of calm. And while, yes, sometimes that can happen, and that is part of the outcomes of a mindfulness practice, it's not always the account that that's going to happen every time. Sometimes there are great difficulties that are encountered. And while that may be expected, also learning how to deal with that as it comes up is an important part of mindfulness training. Let's learn a little bit more about that and what those effects might be. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. This is Ted Meissner, and I hope you are someone who is either new to this or joining us again, and that you're getting something out of these podcast interviews. I'm going to have several different kinds of episodes. Interviews is just one of them. And today, one of the things we're going to be talking about is an area of mindfulness that doesn't always get advertised, certainly in the popular media, about mindfulness. You have to understand, it's complicated. It's simple, but not easy. And those may seem like contradictory things, but really they work together. The simplicity is in doing the practice or just being. That's capacity you've already got. The complexity, though, the complexity is meeting oneself, meeting the conditions in the world around us, and that's not always a smooth meeting. Sometimes it can be very difficult. Sometimes challenges show up that are the expected kind, and sometimes it's a bit more than that. And today's guest is going to talk about some of the research around these experiences and, sometimes the adverse effects of mindfulness. Come on, let's learn a little bit more. Our guest today is Malcolm Wright. Malcolm, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Hi, Ted. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And I really appreciate you working me in as you're traveling quite a lot lately. So thank you so much to that, and for your colleague who's loaning your office, and for that beautiful, beautiful background you've got there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. From the Empress Livia's garden room, 2,000 years old. So quite a survival from ancient times.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about some interesting research that's come up. And for those who are watching this episode, I will link to that. And we're going to talk about it here today because sometimes the papers can be a little difficult to understand, certainly for me, which is why we do these podcasts and interviews. But you're at a business school, and I'm kind of curious what got you interested in doing research on mindfulness. How did this paper come about?
Well, I've sort of worked into cognitive science for a while. So I've been doing work on things like virtual reality shopping, low attention advertising effects, and also work on memory theory and biographical memory. But of course, I developed a bit of a mindfulness practice of my own, or a meditation practice of my own, and a group that I was associated with from a practice point of view was looking for some expertise in survey research, and that is one of the areas in which I have expertise. So I thought, well, I'd better answer the call, and that led to this particular publication, and actually 3 others so far, and more in the works.
Great. That's wonderful, and thank you for doing that, because having expertise in fields that are not just mindfulness experts makes a difference. It's how does this relate into these other areas? So I'm so glad that you're doing that. And this paper focuses on emergent phenomenon stemming from mindfulness practice. And I'm wondering if, for viewers who might not be familiar with that particular term, what EPs are and maybe some examples of what that means.
Sure. So it's a term that a group that I'm associated with has coined to try to describe the range of unusual, usually sudden, unusual mental or somatic bodily effects that can arise during the course of meditation. So an obvious one, familiar maybe to your viewers and listeners, would be the nimitta, or the divine light, or the inner light. Is some kind of an emergent phenomenology, a manifestation that can arise from meditation. Others can be ecstatic thrills, or feelings that sweep across the body. There can also be senses of depersonalization and derealization, and so on. There's quite a number of these that are identified in meditation manuals, and sometimes they're described as corruptions of insight, because people confuse them with a liberating insight, when there may be just some other kind of peak experience that is associated with reorganization of the bodily and perceptual systems. So these emergent phenomena, or the emergent phenomenology, interests us because in the meditation manuals, they're often followed by negative effects as a temporary kind of effect, hopefully, that people can work through towards a better, more liberating understanding of themselves and their environment. But sometimes people get stuck in them for a while or forever, and can experience them in very, very unpleasant and intense fashions. So we're kind of concerned to say, well, with the rise of mindfulness in Western settings and in clinical settings as well, and not to mention, of course, also the risk or desire for similar effects from psychedelic drug use, are people maybe running the risk of having not only emergent phenomenology, but some of these knowledges of suffering that is known to follow it in meditation manuals, at least in retreat settings?
And in particular in retreat settings, because it is such a concentrated practice time,
And
the
that's
likelihood of these phenomenon is much higher.
That's right. And, it's a controversy. Some people will say, look, you're not going to see these outside retreat settings at all. And other people will say, well, yes, you are. And in fact, we do see them. And in fact, we get clinical referrals of people who are experiencing these things. And then, of course, there's an argument about whether, that's because of some other underlying risk factor like mental illness or whatever else it might be. So it's an area of controversy. And, with my scientist hat on, controversy is great, right? Because we can learn something. We can say, well, there's different views. How do we settle this? We settle it empirically. So that's what we've set out to do, not to settle, obviously, the whole debate, but to take the first steps empirically and say, well, let's get some data, and then we can see what that says, and debate the things that flow on from that.
And it's such a rich topic, because some of the things that are challenging that come up in practice is the point of the practice, and it's how people work with that, because the emergent phenomena, not all of them are, for want of a better word, negative or bad. They're kind of the point. It's the exercise, like when you go to a gym, it's not bad that you sweat or that weights are heavy. It's kind of the idea. And you can have maybe an injury.
Well, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? To quote the bard. I think that's right. People can have exactly the same experience, or what might appear to be exactly the same experience from a description provided to an external person, and very different reactions depending upon their preparation, their degree of, in a traditional sense, perhaps purification, their ability to deal with the emotional reactions they might have, and their ability to integrate that experience into their worldview. So it's not just the experience. There's a whole range of other factors that may influence whether people have these kinds of experiences and then how they react to them. And of course, Ted, as you know, it gets a little bit more complicated, because the fact that somebody has a positive or a negative reaction does not necessarily determine whether the long-term impact is positive or negative. Sometimes we may think, wow, that was a fantastic experience, but then subconsciously sort of freak out afterwards, and have some inner conflict that is very difficult to resolve. And similarly, we might have the opposite and go, oh, that was freaky and scary and I don't like it. But something in our perceptual system or our subconscious system is opened up and integrated, and maybe some particular, triggers are reduced in our emotional system, and we just feel better as a result. So it is a complex area.
Yeah, it's not this particular experience or this particular formal contemplative practice is always something that leads to negative consequences or positive consequences. Your individual mileage may vary, viewers here. If you heard me say that many times in the classes, make it very clear your well-being is the most important. And learning how to take care of ourselves and watch for what's going on right now. Am I challenged, or is it getting to be a bit much?
Yeah.
And that's unique to you and your circumstances and the totality of your life history.
And I think it can help, though, knowing what to expect, knowing the range of possible outcomes. So you can start by normalizing the experience a little bit, as opposed to just having a visceral reaction or rejection, or a movement towards or a movement away. So I think part of this is about informed consent, but also part of it is about giving people a bit of a roadmap and saying, hey, these are some of the sites you might see. So when you see them, be mindful of them, as opposed to going, I've got to get out of here, or I've got to go towards that. So that's very much part of the project as well.
And we'll come back to that, because one of the things that I'll be interested in asking a bit later on is around remediation and prevention. How do we help people not get overwhelmed in the first place? But before we get into that, I'm wondering if you could just give a concise overview of what was the structure of this study? What did you do, and how did you measure it, that kind of stuff?
Well, we assembled an expert team, including neuroscientists, meditators, psychiatrists, public health physicians, emergency physicians, cognitive scientists or survey research experts, to try to develop a new instrument to measure these phenomena, because we felt that a lot of the existing scales that look at unusual phenomena were maybe not quite right for our use. They perhaps conflated different things and weren't clear about it. So we were aiming to bring knowledge from meditation manuals or suttas, ancient suttas, into the development of a questionnaire that could more accurately measure what was going on. And as part of that, we're also bringing in different types of measurement theory and survey research theory as well. And we were prompted to do it also by an opportunity to survey the members of a well-known rationalist blog. So that was a great opportunity. But we also thought, well, how do you know whether that's normal or whether that's not normal? So we did a pilot study with some Amazon Turk workers, just to see that our instrument worked, but also to get a sense of whether that was a comparable population and what else we might see. And then we did another large study with a very high quality consumer panel that recruits respondents who get paid a small amount for each response, called Qualtrics, and that's in the United Kingdom. And so we got a group there as well. So we have three populations to compare to give us some confidence in the robustness of our results. So that's how we went about it. And then, of course, we took the results and, tried to see how widespread these phenomena were, and whether people suffered afterwards and sought help, and what the ratios of positive and negative effects was. Just to put an empirical stake in the ground about what was actually going on out there, seeing as there was quite a lot of argument and dispute.
So tell us a little bit about what some of those outcomes were. What were some of the proportions that you saw, and how do people do?
The thing that amazed us was that 45% of the population reported having some kind of emergent phenomenology of our populations. It was a little higher in some, a little lower than others, but even in the lower ones, it was still, 30% plus.
And just to be clear on that, the emergent phenomenon, that doesn't mean 45% had bad, difficult effects. It means something showed up.
Yeah, so they had some other ones I didn't mention before, maybe sudden vivid perceptual processes becoming incredibly vivid and crisp, or out-of-body experience is another one, plus the things I talked about before, like the experience of the inner light, or ecstatic thrills and so forth. So that really surprised us, because if you look at the estimates of what proportion of the population have maybe been on, say, a mindfulness course or are meditating or whatever it might be, it sort of range from 5 to 15%. Now, maybe that's going up because the data is a little old there at the moment, but even so, 45% is a much bigger number than that. So that was the first big surprise. And as part of that, we were also surprised to find, things like, I forget the exact number, about 5% of people experiencing out-of-body experiences. Because, you don't hear about that so much. You hear occasion discussion of it as a sort of maybe a weird thing that some person could be apostrophized as an outdweller in the community, but no, it's actually 1 in 20. And when I talk to people about these results, I'm surprised that some of them will then volunteer, actually I had one, and in some cases they haven't even told their family because it's regarded as not normal. So that's one of the very important things I think that comes from our research, is these phenomena are a normal part of the human condition and ought to be normalized rather than seen as, kind of weird or out there or something to be suspicious of. They are widespread. So, that's the first thing.
Got it. And I'm curious how well prepared people are if they do have some challenging outcomes.
Yeah.
Not overwhelming. A challenge, but not overwhelming. That's it. We'll get into that in a moment. But how well prepared were people as they get into this to have that kind of experience, or some others that you were asking about?
Well, in general, they haven't heard about the risks of these experiences, so they don't usually have a frame of reference to use to try to understand and integrate these experiences into what they're doing. So I think that is something that we hope this research will contribute to changing, so that they know that it might appear. But in general, people had not heard of the risks of these kinds of challenging outcomes. And we also found, quite a large proportion of the population experienced suffering after one of these emergent phenomenology experiences. And we wouldn't want to overstate this, right? Because in general, they're positive. So 30% of people noticed no changes to well-being. 40% of people noticed positive changes to well-being, but 28% of people noticed some negative changes to well-being. And again, with my scientist hat on, this is not causal data. It's just asking people their attribution. So we don't know for certain that it is the cause, but people did attribute it as the cause in our questionnaire. So, you've got a ratio of 40 positive to 28 negative, which is, of all of these events, which is pretty good. So, we want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here in terms of the wonderful transformations and benefits that can come from meditation, or even just down to the regulation of the nervous system that I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners know so well and is so beneficial. But, of those people, a number of them experienced some significant suffering. So we asked, how bad was the suffering after the worst of these events? We asked about the types of suffering as well, which corresponded really closely to what we know from the meditation manuals, indicating, I think, that we're on the right track. And out of everybody, not just those who experienced the emergent phenomenology, but out of the whole population, 13% said they'd experienced moderate or greater suffering following emergent phenomenology. And, that's really, really big, we think. 1.1% said they experienced life-threatening suffering. So, this is something we're going to go, well, there's an issue here. We need to equip people to be ready to deal with this in a clinical framework. And we need to equip meditators to be able to go, well, if I am having trouble, I can get help, and it's not unusual or normal. I'm not going to be institutionalized or told I'm, crazy or medicated, but actually, somebody can give me some help with this and give me help in integrating the experience to ameliorate the suffering. But at the moment, people are not doing that. So we found of those who experienced any kind of suffering, which is a bit more than 13%, I think from memory, about 18%, 63% of them did not seek help. So yeah, we're just trying to shine a light on all of this and go, hey, we just need to be aware of what's going on and find a better way to support people.
Now, Malcolm, when you mentioned that 13% having adverse effects, that's 13% of the 45, not 13% of all people engaging.
That's 13% of all people.
Of all people. Okay.
Yeah. And you know, for that cutoff, we used moderate or greater suffering because we thought that would be suffering at a clinically relevant level. So that's not including the mild or transient suffering or virtually no suffering. It's only those that we thought might be clinically relevant. So, you know, that's an awful lot of people, 13% of those populations. Doesn't mean it's 13% of the whole population. Well, we don't know that because we haven't, you know, we've tried to do representative surveys, but not of the sort that you might be able to make a national population projection from. But I think it's certainly likely to be in that order of magnitude. That's what the evidence would suggest, at least, if not establish with certainty.
And it's mentioned throughout the paper several times that 63% of those who had these significant adverse effects not seeking help afterwards. And I'm wondering if that is just an indication of accessibility to getting help and having that ready to go when someone is entering into an area where, yeah, we know that there is a chance that this can occur and we have those resources ready for you.
I think it's a great idea for meditation leaders and retreat leaders to be ready on this, to brief participants and to have some kind of thought about the resources that might be used. Yeah, and a lot of them do, but some maybe not. So I think that's something that really should probably become a standard within that, if you can talk about a standard in such a diverse group of people. But I think that would be a good idea. But there's also a huge need for clinical education. And, you know, in some ways, ironically, people maybe will do better in a religious context because they have a support structure they can deal with in that context. But if you don't and you go into a doctor, they may know not very much about it. There's you know, a little bit that's got into the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, from the work of the transpersonal psychologists. But you know, they would have loved to have achieved a lot more, I'm sure. So while there's a little bit there, it's pretty brief and sketchy, and there's not much in the emergency medicine textbooks. So we do hear anecdotes from time to time of people who feel that they've been inappropriately medicated when turning up to clinical practices with reports of emergent phenomenology and subsequent suffering, or even inappropriately committed. But, you know, how common is that? We don't know. There are certainly anecdotal reports, but you know, the plural of anecdote is not data. It's just a few more anecdotes. So we don't know.
My favorite person. Thank you for using that phrase, which I use all the time.
That's all right. But what we can say, Ted, is that there's not much in clinical education on it. So, you know, we can say that with confidence, especially as, you know, one of our authors is a board-certified emergency medicine physician, retired now, but, you know, he knows what's available to train emergency medicine physicians, and there's just not much.
Yeah, and there's a couple of different aspects to this. The DSM-5 is not particularly robust around its definitions of trauma, for example, that it's very narrow focused. It doesn't include an entire area of trauma. And it would suggest that that education piece goes a couple of different ways. I think it's necessary for mindfulness teachers to be trained on things like trauma sensitivity and things that this paper brings up, emergent phenomenon, as well as clinicians who have education on mindfulness, because one of the things I see quite commonly is an attitude that mindfulness is just, you know, give me a script, I can read it, and then I'm a mindfulness teacher. Like, no, this is a very different kind of thing than clinical education program.
And mindfulness and meditation is a very technical area in and of itself. I mean, one thing I'm fond of saying is it's worth remembering that, jhanas are not, or concentration absorptions that lead to ecstatic states are not actually, strictly speaking, mindfulness. They're the opposite. They're an absorption in something as opposed to a separation of something. Although then, of course, then later on, you can do mindfulness or vipassana type of practice on those states. And once you learn how to become absorbed in them, you can then separate from them and apply mindfulness techniques. But, that's not really in the public consciousness much at all, I think. And fair enough, you wouldn't expect people to be technically expert in those areas, but it's just an example of how it's not a simple matter. And similarly, people sometimes talk about things like falling into the pit of the void, or depersonalization, which can be very serious. And that is also a very highly technical area. And in some ways, it's fantastic, as you know, because there's so much progress that is associated with that. But then you have this huge inner conflict over one part of the mind-body system rejecting what another part of the mind-body system has discovered. And, that's hard to unwind. And I'm not sure that could easily be incorporated into clinical education. But that's the kind of situation where we might say, well, can we, at least build a group who are capable of dealing with that sort of thing, and knowledge that these might be appropriate people to refer that situation to. I think we're a long way from that at this stage. So if you're in that situation of falling into the pit of the void, really it's, could have some fantastic outcomes, but you have to be kind of lucky to find somebody who can help you navigate them.
And can be an scary, don't want this dysregulation, or it can be wonderful. This is what I started.
Practice. Exactly. Or it can be, oh no, I can't cope. This is horrible. And then you notice that a whole lot of stuff has evaporated and you just feel so much nicer. All of, and a whole range of other outcomes are all possible. But I think, that's an interesting one, because although you might say it's rare, there are practices out there that can trigger it with very little, relatively low doses of meditation. It can happen. So I think that's also important. I don't have data on this, but my sense is that mindfulness of breathing and mindfulness of the body is pretty safe. But there are some hardcore practices out there that are quite accessible to people that can have much more significant effects. And you really just want to know what you're getting into and be ready, before you go in that direction, in my opinion.
And speaking of that readiness, in addition to our idea of education and understanding that mindfulness is an entire field and a discipline, it's not just some techniques.
Yeah.
One of the things I also am curious about is your thoughts on potential ways to prevent people from finding themselves being severely dysregulated in the first place. And certainly education is part of that.
Yeah.
Full disclosure about, here are some things that may come up and here's how to deal with them. What else is coming up too in that area?
Well, the traditional thing, of course, was to engage in moral behavior first. And I think we could generalize that a little bit by saying you kind of have to deal with your stuff. It's often a different S word is often used there, but you do. And if you're going deep down the path of meditation, if you haven't dealt with it beforehand, you'll be dealing with it during that path. And in fact, you will be anyway, because you think you've dealt with it and you'll discover more. I think that's really important, not to sort of race to it as an escape necessarily, but to just try to be ready to go, okay, I need to let go of some of these hatreds and some of these desires, and, just try to forgive other people a bit, and to forgive yourself as well. That's the most important thing. And the hardest. So I think some kind of moral preparation is important. And there are lots of different ways to do that. I used to cling to money much more, so I found it incredibly cathartic starting to give money to beggars. It was fantastic, because it's a tantric contradiction of that unskillful element that was in my personality. So it will be different for every person, but I think have a look at yourself and go, sort your stuff out a bit first. But also, I think there's work that can be done with the peripheral nervous system as well, the somatic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system. That makes you much more resilient, just regulates the emotions much more and gives you much more control over them. So breathing exercises, I think, can be really good for that, and particularly some types of mindfulness of breathing or systematic breathing exercises as well. And you can sort of, I think, teach your brain to detect the ebb and flow of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system with the breath and how that goes into the somatic nervous system. And often I think in these things we're teaching the subconscious as much as the subconscious, as much as the conscious, and the subconscious goes, oh yeah, okay, I get it now, it's going like that. And when you get some kind of emotional upwelling, you have a bit more of a frame of reference, conscious or subconscious, to manage it so that you can be a little bit more separated from it, a little bit more in control of it, and maybe have a little bit more choice about what you experience instead of, just being under the control of the puppet master, getting constantly triggered by your own emotions. So, I think that's good. But again, I don't have any science on any of this, Ted. This is just my observations from practice. And part of the point of this kind of research is a number of us have a lot of observations and a number of us are trained scientists or clinicians. So how can we try to convert some of these intuitions into actually scientific data, so that we can really build up a more reliable body of knowledge for mindfulness and meditation.
And I would add to what you're saying on mindfulness of breathing. While that is helpful for most people, again, your individual mileage may vary. There are participants in every program I teach for whom being aware of breathing and getting in touch with that is dysregulating. It's not so much about the breath. It's no magic about the breath. It's about your attention. And you can choose different home bases that are as supportive for you. If breathing doesn't happen to be one, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you can't try this practice and see what it's like for you. It means finding it the right way that is a good fit.
Oh, yeah, completely agree. If you were to look at Buddhist kind of records on this, and that's only one tradition, right? They say, what is the saying? There are 84,000 doors to the Dharma. My absolutely favorite sutta is the Satipatthana, or the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, the greater discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. And there's so much in that. I tried to add it up once, and I didn't get to 84,000, but I can't remember what it was, 6,000 or 7,000 techniques I did get to. But by the time that you look at their different objects and different ways of doing things in so many combinations, it's incredibly rich. And you're so right. For me, I've found breathing really excellent, because in some ways I've been working on it for over 30 years, also through martial arts as part of my background. But there are many different areas. I think, what I would say is, when you start to deconstruct emotion or mind or reality, probably the risks of having unusual things happening are going to get quite a lot higher. So, it's worth, whatever your technique, just be aware you can go deep, and you can, as you know, you can go deep with any technique, but just be aware that when you're going deep, you're going on a journey. Better make sure you've packed your lunch.
A good way to put it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers?
Well, I just to say, peace and love to everyone. It's a fantastic area, mindfulness and meditation. It has the potential to bring so much benefit and to unwind so much suffering and anger, but it has its complex aspects as well. So it's good to be part of a community that can guide you a little bit, one way or another. So noble friends are important. So I hope you're all doing it together. And if you don't have an in-person community, then a non-in-person community can be good as well, or you can create your own virtual community. Actually, there's a huge community of all of us out here trying to do the right thing, trying to support people, and we'll keep trying to do that. I hope that your own journey is a skillful and beneficial one.
Thank you so much. Our guest today, Malcolm Wright. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ted. Thank you. It was great fun.
Thanks for being here, everyone, and I hope our discussion today helped round out your understanding that while we can find great calm and peace in mindfulness, it is training, it is exercise, and we need to do so with some awareness, taking care of ourselves when difficulties show up. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.